Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth.
This morning, we're looking ahead to the 2026 election, and Luther Campbell is running for Congress. The former rapper, better known as Uncle Luke, says he wants to represent District 20. That seat is currently occupied by Congresswoman Sheila McCormick, who right now is fighting a federal indictment. Campbell rose to fame as a member of the Miami hip-hop group 2 Live Crew. These days, he's known for his community outreach. He recently resigned as the head football coach at Miami Edison High School. Campbell says that he wants to bring a spirit of bipartisanship to Congress while addressing issues surrounding education, crime, cost of living, and immigration.
When you look at this district, it's 700,000 people in it, but at the same time, it's 300,000 people that are, they have temporary status that can be affected. And we know how Donald Trump feels about Haitians.
Well, we asked Campbell about his campaign and how he expects to run it, and he says, well, it's going to be fun.
Well, at least he's making it clear whose vote he wants. Last night we talked about 2 Haitians who were disrespecting foundational Black Americans, and it seems we're going to continue that overall theme into this morning. This isn't an election competition, this is going to be tether wars. Sheila McCormick is Haitian, by the way. We've talked about her before. She's part of the Immigrant Black Caucus, dedicated to making sure that FBA votes get drowned out by, well, anyone who's not a citizen. But now it seems we got this relic from the 1990s who's going to throw his Timu pimp hat into the ring. Enter Luther Campbell. He's an immigrant too. His mother is Bahamian and his father is Jamaican. So, of course, his very first move is to reach out to Haitians because he thinks that this is going to undercut McCormick's support. Never mind that she's Haitian herself, and these immigrants have shown that they prefer their own immigrant group. That's part of the reason why they don't have the ability to unite with other immigrant groups. That's the problem with a bunch of opportunists. Oh, and on a side note, haven't you noticed how whenever these Negroes wind up finding themselves on the wrong side of the law, these little bootlick politicians, you don't see the white Democratic hierarchy coming to their rescue or claiming we need new laws to protect them. No, they just let them swing in the wind. That's the devil's bargain these chumps make. But Uncle Luke knows that he doesn't have any real support from the FBA community. Like so many of these bootlicks, though, he's hoping that he can get somewhere without having to deal with us because his entire goal is to do like these other professional butt kissers and to get himself a government job, finesse himself some way into the government circle so that he can milk it for all the patronage and influence peddling he can get. I don't know how corrupt this fearless McCormick woman is, but I'm willing to bet you that if Luther Campbell, by some unholy miracle, does make it to Congress, he'll have whatever alleged corruption she's committed beat by a country mile. I mean, seriously, what the hell makes anyone think that Luther Campbell can be taken any more seriously than, say, Herschel Walker? It just goes to show American politics is not politics anymore, it's just comedy. I find it amusing, though, that the man whose music was the bane of teachers and parents back in the 90s is now involved with coaching and community outreach. That's already scary. I'd love to say that he's come a long way since his days of smut peddling on wax and showing his little softcore porn videos masquerading as music videos, but that wouldn't be the truth. Smells to me more like all that money he and his crew made back in the day probably has run a little bit low, or just run out altogether, and this is his plan B. You know, the person I blame for this, though, is Donald Trump. Not because of his immigration policies. That has nothing to do with this. I blame Trump because ever since the Orange Man got himself elected, it's convinced every Tom, Dick, and Harry with delusions of grandeur and an ego, or in Luther Campbell's case, a washed-up entertainer, to think that if a former reality TV star and professional BS artist like Trump can become president twice in a row, then hell, anybody can do it. Or at the very least, anybody can make it to Congress. That's the only message they took away from Trump's victory, that basically the bar is so low now that any moron can get over it, and so all the morons are trying. And what exactly is Luther Campbell's political platform? Immigration, because he knows that's what's important to the DNC leadership. This is tripling down on their failed strategy to ignore FBAs and see if they can win office regardless. That's who these people are, family. They'd rather lose with the wrong policies than to win with the right ones. They don't see the GOP as their political opponents. They see our righteous demands as being the only real threat. The Democrats freely have made deals with the GOP. They even support GOP candidates like Liz Cheney. But when it comes to anything regarding us, they have zero tolerance. They are 100% opposed to anything coming from us or anything that would benefit us. But as ridiculous as the Democrats have become, it makes all the sense in the world that Luther Campbell would probably run as one of their candidates. You know, I remember when Kanye West put himself on the presidential ballot as a joke a few years back, but this is worse. He's not doing this to be helpful to Black Americans. And if he were to run for office, he would do the same crap that the others in the Immigrant Black Caucus have done. Name anything that Joe Neguse, Stephen Horsford, or the likes of Barack Obama or Kamala Harris has ever done for anyone but themselves. And speaking of self-serving people, you can bet there's going to be a bunch of other washed-up rappers from the 90s who are going to be trying to get 5 seconds of fame by pretending as if they're supporting him. That's the great thing about Florida politics. It's crazier than California, but with none of the charm or productivity. Now, Luther Campbell is a tether, not because he's from the Caribbean. That's not what makes someone a tether, but because he came here, benefited enormously from our culture and our music. But if you're old enough to remember, then you'll recall Luther Campbell also marked a turning point in rap music, and not a good one. He did as much as anyone, if not more, to begin the vulgarization of rap music. He introduced raunchy, perverted themes into the genre. Before the 2 Live crew, the music had a very different way of presenting itself, especially where the depiction of black women was concerned. Now, sure, there may have been some guys who put a toe across the line. Ice-T's famous album cover for Power was certainly something that pushed the envelope. But for the most part, even Ice-T stopped at that point. People had self-respect and they wanted to be respected. That's FBA culture, and we know it is because when 2 Live Crew came along with Me So Horny and their other pornographic material, they didn't push the envelope, they tore it to pieces. They were the ones who introduced strip club culture into hip-hop. They were explicit about it, and their success made it where a lot of other low-talent people figured that this was the fastest way to make it big. The kind of things that Luther Campbell introduced at that time were not universally embraced. In fact, there was a lot of pushback to it from the FBA community in the 90s. And this was not a bunch of prudes or people who were stuck up. These were people who recognized that something alien and foreign was being introduced into our midst, and the white media was pushing it to the hills, glamorizing it. It's easy for people to resort to their lowest possible nature, especially if it's being promoted by the most powerful segments of the society. Young people in particular, and young females in specific, want attention, and they'll do any stupid thing to get it. And what is it that young people look for? What is it that they want to do? Something easy, something fast, immediate gratification. And understand something. When the young go in the wrong direction, they'll take the entire society with them. What holds people in check are social mores. Mores are your social customs, that which the community understands is right and proper for them to do. People in these groups also understand that violating social mores carries penalties. But as I've told you for nearly 20 years now, the entire reason that we're infested and overrun by tethers, bootlicks, agents, shills, and ops is because these traitors understand that they can work against the community's interest, they can undermine us, even openly attack us, and still be able to eat the next day because the dominant society will feed them, at least for a while. So as long as they can get some crumbs from Massa's table, for these turncoats, attacking the FBA community becomes a victimless crime. Or in many cases, it's not a crime at all. It's just a cheap and easy way to get a come-up. This is the well that Luther Campbell draws from, and he intends to drown us in it if we let him. You want to know why Marcus Garvey and every other significant figure of note from the Caribbean had to flee to the U.S. to get support for what they wanted to do? And why, when Garvey was deported back to Jamaica, that was the end of his movement? Look at what Luther Campbell did. The kind of backstabbing and disrespect that he's done, that's the norm in those places. The reason these tethers are so quick to show no respect for us is because in their home countries, they didn't show any respect for each other. A broken loyalty system. That's what last night's Sunday address was about. They're chasing the delusion of white acceptance. They still want to be accepted by their colonial masters, and in many cases, in fact, in a majority, I would say, they see themselves as being white, or at the very least, they see themselves as having a superior mentality, because they've bought totally into the idea that excellence means to adhere closely to the contempt for black people that their white masters had for them. This is why there's so much dysfunction, and they can't unite or organize or even cooperate. They wave the flag of their home country, But without the dominant society to feed them, they would have nothing. By the way, while we're on the subject of fleeing, you want to know another huge reason that the tethers constantly shout out the very countries they fled from, and why even though they fled to the other side of the world, they still refer to themselves by whatever country in Africa or whatever island in the Caribbean they came from? They learned that from their white colonial masters, too. These Europeans, particularly the British, live in countries around the world. They're born in countries all over the place, and yet they refer to themselves not as immigrants, but as expats, which means expatriates. An expatriate is defined as someone who withdrew themselves from residence in one's native country. Now, it's also defined as renouncing allegiance to one's country, but when have you seen any of these white expats do that? The closest they ever came to that was when you had white racists in Africa calling themselves setting up their own puppet regimes, like the fictional and now non-existent Rhodesia. That's about the closest that these white expats ever came to renouncing their home countries. And as we all saw, they only did that for show. It was never serious. But the behavior of these white expats is always based on bragging about some country in Europe that most of them weren't born in and a lot of them never even set foot in. They're in someone else's country living it up. And they also make it a point to tell the native population that they benefit from having these hostile, arrogant foreigners in their land. Any of this sounding familiar yet? Now understand something. Luther Campbell doesn't want to go to Congress because he wants to produce for black people. This is yet another blatant example of a self-interested professional BS artist who's only out for himself. But don't be surprised when some other washed-up has-beens decide that they're going to come slithering around telling you that there's something in it for you and me. Luther Campbell's come out the gate saying exactly what his idea is. He's not even pretending that he's going to be a candidate for us. He wants to make it clear. Immigration's going to be his issue. One's got to wonder if he has any outstanding problems on that front. Either way, I gotta admit, it would make all the sense in the world for him to run as a Democrat. Remember, the only reason anyone knows who this talentless clown is because 30 years ago he put out a so-called album that had a picture of strippers with their butts to the camera. Well, I guess this time around the campaign slogan will be, "Get your booty off the pole and to the polls." Good day and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Irise, Emir Miller, Kenneth Johnson, Wesley Monroe, and NawG95. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.